Hello, welcome back. Okay, so this video is going to pick it up where we left off. I assume you have watched the download Excel video and that you successfully have the states data set open in front of you in Excel. That's where you need to start for this tutorial. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through a little bit about what's happening on the screen in front of you, like what does all this stuff mean, and I'm going to walk through how to make new variables in Excel. So a little bit about the data. This is all data about the 50 United States plus the District of Columbia. I like to include DC just for fun. And I want to tell you a little bit about how, like what you see in front of you. So every column is a variable. Every row is a unit of analysis. All of this stuff is specific information about each state. So the states is the unit of analysis. Some examples of nominal level data would be these first group of variables. So the name of a state. This is nominal data because each observation is just identifying the name of the state. There's no differences in value. You can't add, subtract, divide, any of that fun stuff. Region is interesting. It's also a nominal level variable, but it does have numbers. In this case, the numbers don't have numeric meaning. So 3 might be less than 4, but like conceptually speaking, it doesn't mean anything that different than 4 because it's also just identifying something. In this case, values of 3 identify the region of the South. These other variables, in fact, most of the data is actually interval ratio data. So all of these ones, the P female, P male, these are percentages. It is the percent of individuals who are male and female in each state. These are interval ratio data. But if we scroll down here to the end, there is at least 1 or 2 examples of ordinal level data. So keep sliding on over here. We've got lots of fun data to play with over the semester. But if we come down here and look at this one right here, the economic ranking of each state. This is a variable that is just putting, I don't know, 6 different variables go in together to create the ranking, and it just ranks the economic activity of each state. And so in this case, like, you can be 2, and that's good. You're second in this case. I assume higher numbers mean greater economic activity. But the difference between, like say number 9 and number 7 is unknown. Like, we don't know how close those states actually are to each other. We just know that one of them is in 9th place and one of them is in 7th place. Some other fun stuff that you can do with the data. Oh, the obesity. This is another ranking. The ranking of the number of individuals or percent of individuals who would be obese by BMI. I'm pretty sure that's what this variable is. If you ever want to know, what is this variable, what is more information about it, because up at the top in the first row, these are the variable names, and they tend to be just really short little handles. Down here at the bottom, there's another sheet called labels, and this gives you the variable label information. Now, this is good practice. You want to include somewhere in your Excel file information about what are each of your variables, right? You want to fill in more information because you might not remember, for example, what households is. Households is the number of households. But sometimes we use shorthand that is pretty cryptic and it's hard to remember. Or when you share it with someone else, that person's not going to know what you were talking about. So the obesity rank is from the CDC. It's levels of percent over BMI of 30 back in 2012. So old data, but that's okay. This is just data to play with. I personally like to keep labels on a separate sheet and my data just on its own sheet. If you ever need to add a sheet, you would click on this little plus sign and it will open up to an empty data set. I'm going to go back to states right now, and I want to show you how to sort information. So let's go ahead and sort, and let's find out, what's the fattest state. This seems like really important information we need to know. If you come up here to the options for sort and filter, we're going to use the filter option. If I click the drop down arrow, we want to click on filter. And what this does is it adds this little drop down arrow next to every variable name. And that's pretty useful because it will allow us to sort not just that variable, but the entire data set based off of one variable so that you can still identify who, let's see, is it this one? Nope, that's obese weight. We've got to keep going. Because we want to be able to identify not just the number one, but who is number one. So this is obesity rank. If we click on that drop-down arrow, we want to leave them all selected because we want them all to be sorted. And we want to click on this to go from smallest to largest. And you can see in the blink of an eye, it puts them in numeric order. It is possible to have ties in ranking, so that's why you see 2 number 9s, 2 number 8s. That is allowed. So let's scroll back over. And number 1, oh, Mississippi. Why am I not surprised? But they are, I guess, technically the fattest state, and that's just not me being mean. That is, supported by the data. So there you go. But this is how you can sort information. I'm not going to lie, visually, it feels cluttered to me, so when I'm done sorting information, I typically come in and turn the filters back off. It will leave things, though, the last way that you had it filtered, unless you revert it back, which is fine. It's not a big deal. Some people, though, they really like things to be sorted alphabetically, and I understand that. But for now, we don't need to worry about it so much. So the next thing I want to show you to do is how to make a new variable. So we are going to come down here, down towards the end of the data, and you can see we've got some old election data. We've got the number of votes for Barack Obama in 2012, for Mitt Romney, and then we have the number of votes cast in 2012, but let's do something a little bit recent. We've got the number of ballots cast in 2016, and the number of ballots for Clinton and for Trump. So we're going to turn this into a percent of votes cast. Let's do Donald Trump. And the way that we're going to do that, it's really important to be able to do this, one, because you want to be able to compare two states to each other, but states are very different in terms of size and population. And so by controlling for the total number of ballots cast, you can turn it into a percent. And percentages allow you to fairly compare two very different things to each other. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to click here first on death, and then right click and choose an insert. And this puts in an empty column right next to the variable for Trump, which is the one we're going to need that information. So I like to keep the new variable close. And I'm going to type in a name, P Trump. And then in this first cell, we're going to type in an equation. This is one of the nice things about Excel. You don't have to do a lot of the math work yourself. You can tell the machine what to do, and it will do the work for you. So the first thing you're going to type is equals. This alerts Excel that you are going to be doing an equation. And then we're going to click on this cell for the number of votes for Trump. And you can see it puts the corresponding identification in terms of a letter and a number in our formula cell. I'm going to hit backslash for divide, and then we're going to divide that by ballots for 2016, which is this column right here. This right here will create the proportion. So I'm going to hit space bar and then star 100. This will multiply it by 100 in order to show it as a percent. If you hit the enter key, you get a number 57.858. So if I round here to the whole number, 58% of ballots cast in the state of Mississippi for the 2016 election were for Donald Trump. Now the fun thing about Excel is that we can just click and drag, and like magic, it will calculate the rest of these for us. Boom. So beautiful. So now we have just calculated the percent vote for Donald Trump. I'm going to come up here and save, because I just made something new and I'm terrified of losing it. And I'm going to save this on my desktop. And I'm going to change the name. You don't have to change the name, this just helps me keep track of which data set I'm using. I'm going to call this V2 for version 2. So awesome, well done. If you want to go ahead and do the same thing and create the percent vote for Clinton, you go right on ahead. But the next thing I actually want to show you is how to create a percent change variable. We are going to do that for the emissions. This is CO2 emissions from 1992 and 2012, and we're going to look to see which state had an increase or decrease over time. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to click on the obesity rank, right click, and then click Insert, so that I get an empty column right here next to Admissions 2012. And then I'm going to name this PEMIT. And down here at the bottom is where I'm going to put in the formula. So first things first, I'm going to type equals, and then we're going to do a little bit something fancy here. We're going to open up a parentheses, a bracket. Totally looks like a sad face, but it's not sad. Everything is fine. And you're going to want to click on the admissions from 2012, and then hit the subtraction key, and then click on the admissions from 1992. So the first step, close out my parenthesis, is to subtract the 1992 information from the 2012 information. Then I'm going to hit the backslash for divide, and we're going to divide by the 1992 information. So BB2 will go in there again. This is because the oldest year, 1992, is going to be our baseline. That's what we're going to compare either the increases in emissions or the decreases in emissions to, whatever it was in 1992. And then the same thing, star 100 to multiply by 100. So we can see that Mississippi has actually had almost a 28% increase in the amount of emissions between 2012 and 1992. It's like, come on, Mississippi, get it together. But the same thing, we can click on this little box right here, click and drag, and it will calculate it for the other cells. So you can see some of them are negative, and that's good. What that means is it was a reduction, so in this case a reduction by 7% of the emissions between 2012 and 1992. So we can go all the way down to the bottom, and there we go. This is how we can look at a percent change. So something to keep in mind is that a regular percent is never going to be over 100 or less than 0, because it's bound between 0 and 100. But percent changes can be less than 0. So you can have a negative percent change, which means it decreases, and they can be greater than 100. You can have a more than 100% change or growth in something. So we've created two variables now. So I want to add that information to my label sheet. Now here's something that is totally personal. You can just add them here at the bottom, or you can insert rows so that they match up with the order of the data set. And that's actually what I'm going to do. I'm going to hit right click here and insert, because I like my labels to follow the order that they're in the data set. Ooh, forgot the D. Here we go. Typing is hard. Oh, 2016. There we go. And then I'm going to come up to emissions right here, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to insert a row. We're going to call this PEMIT, and then it is the percent change in emissions from fossil fuel combustion. No, not combustion. Typing is hard. And this is 2012 to 1992. All right, fabulous. So because we have added two variables and we've added the labels, I'm going to come up here and click Save again. And if you have been able to create two variables, good on you, fabulous job. We're ready for the next thing. I want to show you how to make a pivot table. Pivot tables are a big deal in Excel, but they're not super difficult to make. They can be really useful, though, to show summary information. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to be able to do will be to calculate the average, like the mean, or to find the standard deviation. So that's something that you're going to need to be able to do in Excel. You can do that several ways. Actually, let me show you a pretty easy way. Let's do the emissions one. I think in the handout I use a different variable, but it really doesn't matter. You could pick any variable you want to, but I'm going to highlight that one just so I know where I'm at. And I'm going to scroll down here to the bottom of the data. I'm just looking for the first empty cell. And I'm going to want to calculate the average percent change across all the states here. So the way that we do that is I'm going to use a shortcut. If you come up here to this little epsilon symbol in Autosum, if you click the drop down, there are several other options. And for this first one, we're just going to look at the average. So I'm going to click average. And you can see it puts in the formula for me and highlights that column. If I come to the top, you can see, oh, it changed it. But we would just, sometimes it's nice to double check that it's only highlighting the numbers and not including the text. But then when I moved it, it jumped off, so it's fine. Just re-highlight this stuff here, and then hit enter. And looking at all 50 states between 2012 and 1992, the average percent change was a growth of 4.46. So that is the average for the percent change in emissions. I'm going to go down one more cell. I'm going to show you how to do the standard deviation. So click the drop down. This time we're going to go to more functions. And happily enough, standard deviation shows up first. So I'm just going to click that guy. But if you're ever looking for something and it's not apparent, you can actually type in the search bar standard deviation and then hit go, and it brings it up too. We're just going to use this first one. So go ahead and click OK. And it's asking for values. This is where you're going to need to highlight the data. Don't include the mean. You just want to include the variable information and not the name. If you've got text in there, it won't work. So then you click OK. And here we go. This is the standard deviation, 18.25. So hopefully you have been able to stay caught up and have found both the mean and the standard deviation. Alright, so in addition to finding summary statistics by using the Autosum feature up here to find things like the average and standard deviation, which, don't worry right now if you don't know what those are, we're going to talk about those a lot in a few days. I want to show you how to make a basic pivot table, which is another way to find summary information. And we're going to do that with the death variable. So the death variable is telling us which states have the death penalty and which states do not. So if you see a number 1, that is a state with the death penalty. 0 are states that do not have the death penalty. So to make a basic pivot table, I'm going to put my cursor here. You're going to come up to, actually we'll just highlight this whole column first. You want to come to Insert and then select Pivot Table. And it will ask you, is this the range you want? And you're like, yeah, that looks good. And it will ask you where you want it placed. I'm just going to let it do it in a new worksheet. That's totally fine. Click OK. And then this happens. And you're probably like, well, that's not very exciting. The exciting thing happens with the options. So the first thing you're going to do is check the variable, like, yes, I'd like to see this information. And then we're going to click on this and drag it down here to values. So now we can see it puts up a count. Now we can see that there are 21 states that do not have the death penalty and 30 states that do. So if I've got any future murderers out here listening, you're going to want to pick one of these 21 states that do not have the death penalty to commit your deeds. The other thing we can do is we can change what we see here, because sometimes it's nice to see what is the percentage for each of these categories. And if we click on the drop-down arrow and then click on Value Field Settings, we can change this, what we see here. It's by clicking on the tab to Show Value As, and then the drop-down, we want the percent of column total. And then click OK. And now it shows us that states without the death penalty make up 41% of the data. States with the death penalty make up almost 59% of the data. So this is a very simple pivot table. We will use these more throughout the class, and we will make fancier ones where we add in another variable and look at the interaction between two variables that are looking at categorical information. What's nice about this is it's stored in its own sheet. You don't have to worry about getting rid of it. You can just let it lie there. And we can go back to the states data set. Now, one more thing I want to briefly cover, and that's to get you ready for your first homework assignment. I'm going to click on sheet 1, this empty sheet down here at the end. When you get your first homework assignment, you have to enter in your own data. Now this is something that's forcing you to practice precision, which is a very, very important skill in data management. You have some data that's given to you in a PDF file, and you need to put that data into Excel so that we can manipulate it and play with it. And so it's going to matter the way that you set this up. You want to make sure that each of your columns is a variable and each of your rows is a unit of analysis, is one of your observations. Because Excel doesn't mind. You can start typing, and spelling, the greatest novel of all times here, and then skip down a few spaces and then start entering in data like names, addresses. Alright, so I have someone here at the door, so I'm going to stop this video here, but this should be enough to get you started, and feel free to reach out to myself or Fidelia if you need help.